open the grand final of Doxbridge Worlds 2022. Hear, hear.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, perfectly so.
When I years ago started debating, I was pretty sure that was going to be the thing I was going to start my final speech with. Yay, I'm audible. Before I start though, 3 people I really would like to thank. 1, Daan Welling, thanks a lot for all the coaching you did to us. 2, Piotr Koster, you're an absolute legend. You spoke with Robert and me multiple times. We couldn't have been here without you. 3, Robert, you're fat and you're ugly. No, just kidding, you're great. Audio tip, Matine. Cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Cool. Let me characterize to you firstly what it's going to look like. Note that it's a hypothetical scenario where no living people maintain a belief in the existence of a higher power. That is to say, we are going to characterize to you what this world looks like and why likely people are not even caring about this higher power anymore. Opposition needs to give you systemic reasons why that world is going to, how it's going to look like and why it's different from ours. So firstly, what's likely to happen? Firstly, we say this is the far future. There is no appeal to belief anymore because you don't need it anymore. We are far enough to not resort to religion and have other ways to this. Why do people believe in first place? We think to a large extent this is something that comes from early age, but the reason why it's so effective is because there are coping mechanisms. I think there are roughly 5. Fear of death, grieving, justice, sense of community, and poverty. I'm going to first go over that, then I'm going to explain why we have less violence, why we have better, and why you don't consent opting your religion, and why it's better on our side of the house. So firstly, let's talk about coping mechanisms. Fear of death. How is that likely to be dealt with on our side? So we already see that there is more optimistic nihilism. There's a strong narrative of life goes on without you. We think that is likely to increase. If that's not going to be happen, then I think it's very likely that people still believe in God. Therefore, that's to say, at the moment that we're going to reach this hypothetical scenario, that we have less fear of death in first place. But I would pause it here and say the reason that we fear it is because what religion is posing it to us. Namely, there's heaven and hell, which we don't have certainty about. We always might be scary. Hey, there is going to be something afterwards. We may be tortured. We simply don't know. We think that's better on our side of the house. We think it's likely to be coped on our side. Secondly, on grieving, we think that you're simply less scared anymore that they're in hell. But we also see we are likely scientifically much further into actually believing that they will be in a better place. Thirdly, on justice, we say we're likely to have developed our legal systems way more. We think that the reason that people now are likely to believe in heaven or hell is because it's very convenient to listen to. People don't perceive themselves as bad. They're likely to perceive others as bad. At the moment that someone did something very harmful to a family member of mine, I want to see that person tortured. We think that the reason why we're not going to care about that anymore is because we may have better legal systems, we have better information, we have better cameras, we have better social media, we have better technology to actually discover that information. So justice is likely to be done better on our side of the house. Fourth, sense of community. We think that because of globalization, because of internet, there are different ways actually to find globalization. We also see that under the world, it's likely that stigmas under specific niches are likely to be less. Fifthly, on poverty, we see there are more efficient ways to extract food, more ways to actually redistribute to people. We're likely to be better in automation, all those kind of things. Note that all of this needs to be true because it's prerequisite in no one needing that God anymore. Therefore, by virtue of the motion, it needs to look like this. Otherwise, opposition needs to give you systemic reasons why this would be different. Cool. Let's talk about then what this world likely is going to look like. Bit of preemption. What's going to stay the same? Yeah, sure. Opposition is going to stand up. There are some excuses to behave in a certain way. We think the difference, though, is the epistemic certainty. You're less certain that these are going to be the correct ones. Simply, there are no scriptures. There are no religious leaders to tell you to live accordingly. People still can have excuses. They will be radically different and less powerful on their side. Violence in the name of religion. Why it's better on our side of the house. Firstly, why do people commit violence in the first place? Firstly, there's inherently a conflict. You either respect the other or you respect your own religion. That is to say, you feel like these people are inherently wrong. You don't want to respect them for that because they simply are committing blasphemy. They don't believe in the correct kind of God. And they basically have a really wrong perception of what life is going to look like. We think the second mechanism why people do it is because the material world is frankly minor compared to the afterlife. Heaven or hell is infinite. At the moment that I have been in hell for 1 million years, I still haven't been for 1% of my entire time, simply because infinity is pretty fucking long. Mathematics people, you know this. Cool. How is that changing? Firstly, there's no longer a conflict. We see there's no longer scriptures that tell you this is bad and higher authorities telling you this is bad. Of course, there's still people that are not going to like others, but the difference, though, is there's less of an authority for the defined word and blasphemy for which are way more proximate to you. We think that is radically different. People are less likely to opt into that. But secondly, the material world is now everything that's out there. simply because because heaven and hell do not exist. 80 years or maybe 150 by then is simply what's up there. That is to say, that's now going to be the most important to you. At the moment, there will be repercussions for you. Those will be the most important ones. Others, and the difference is then the others are not wrong about the deep essence of life. We think it's very less likely that you commit violence in the name of religion. Before I'm going to impact that, is there a PY from closing?
Yeah, so your burden in this debate is to prove in every single instance, or at least in the vast majority of cases, that religion is terrible. On our side, we have to prove that the good outweighs the bad. Please do.
Yeah. But if there is still something good in terms of religion, people likely still are believing. The difference, by the virtue of the motion, they already stopped believing. You need to kind of engage with that. Also, Jack, multiple times you have taken a POI from me when you were on the late side of the short diagonal. I really wish you should do. Jason, judge them accordingly. Cool. Impacts of what all I just said. Firstly, religious wars frankly become non-existent. I think it's trivial why this is so important. We explained to you that this likely leads to massive deaths, massive amounts of people being harmed. They say, yeah, but there are still other wars that exist. We say that still on the comparative, there are less wars committed from this perspective. Also less buy-in, simply because nationalism is not as strong to you as opting into a war as religion is, which literally determines the afterlife for you. Secondly, on exclusion of marginalized groups, we tell you, A, it's non-believers, people that are on the wrong side of what they should be believing. They are treated badly in the status quo. Less likely to be done on our side of the house, simply because no one believes anymore. And second goes to people that believe in other religions. You're less likely to say that they are wrong, they're committing blasphemy, because they're now all believing in the same thing, namely nothing. Yay. Finally, on this point, we tell you people that do not fit within the scriptures. We tell you that this tears families apart. It forces people to live on their terms. I'm talking about LGBT plus individuals. I'm talking about people that don't fit in the norm accordingly from the Holy Book. We think that is very terrible from you because they hear from a young age. There's a deep feeling that's correct. We think that parents take pride from this. It's very hard to do this. Finally, though, on why religion is something that you inherently do not consent opting into. Firstly, what I just said, we think that you hear from a young age, and there's a deep feeling that it is the thing that is right. You're very unlikely to be exposed to other things at the moment that you are from a religious community. On their side of the house, this is the only thing that you hear. On our side, we think that this is way better because we see that in the religions, parents take pride from this, tell them to live accordingly. Therefore, it's very hard. It leads to women not being able to leave their houses. It leads to LGBT plus people not being able to marry in any way, shape, or form. None of that is still happening under their side of the house because then you need to come with actually analysis and reasoning why this is a good thing to do. Instead of you can just appeal to a higher authority. None of that is possible under their side of the house. We think that all of this is becoming much better because we prove to you that we are way likelier to have a very nice world at the moment that this happens. Because we tell you there's less violence, and because we tell you that fundamentally you consent way better. I'm very proud to vote for the. I'm very proud to stand in OG. Please vote for the only ESL team in this round.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for that speech and invite the Leader of Opposition to continue the debate.
Great, just check that you can hear me fine.
Yep, loud and clear.
All right. I think POI's in the chat. Cool, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. I don't have time for fancy introduction. So firstly, on what the comparative is in this debate, then sort of outweighing coercion, then a bunch of benefits that we get from off of religion in the continuum of the time that humanity still exists. Because look, no, the comparative in this debate is obviously the world that we have right now, as in which is most people still being somewhat religious across the world with different interpretations of God, as in Christianity, Islam, whatever. Basically the world we're living around. Versus the world in which, for a certain reason, people over time abandon religion. Because not what the Infoslide and the motion tells you. It's a continuous process. Question: do we support the process itself that then reaches the end goal of people not believing in the religion in the end? Cool. What is in the framing? I think they're directly clashing with Dan here on what is the world that we live in. Look, what are hypothetical scenarios in which this world would be likely to lose its faith in 100 years' time, right? I think there are two possible scenarios. The one is either the world becomes so beautiful that we never ever have to rely on divine comfort, or B, we throughout time fall into hopelessness of divine even saving us in the first place based on how much we fucked up as a society within our own system. So we stop believing that we abandon reliance on any type of sort of divine intervention to come and save us. Cool. No, the first scenario is quite highly unlikely based on the characterization of the world we live in. Look, know that the systems that we have in the place of today, right? People being exploited and slaves of the capitalist system, corrupt autocratic governments, social media that's pumping our brains with sad chemicals and making us dependent on quick fixes of dopamine, making us competitive, out of touch, insecure, and overall unhappy. Know that you as a person that's living here is going to live on this world in the next hundreds of years, fighting your place in the hierarchy to get approval from people around you, right? It's a shit life to live in. I think this isn't a world in which people automatically, now that they think there is God, hug each other, get all of the justice and all the community things that happens automatically when you don't believe there's a big man in the fucking sky, right? I think the essential thing is you have to look at this world that we have right now and how it's going to progressively get worse based on the mechanism that I just talked to you about, right? Meaning that this world is already the one where it puts people against each other, makes them feel like shit for everything that they are, right? Know that it's more likely that because of these systems that we live in right now is this world, we're going to continue living in, we would lose faith comparatively in a savior and overall lose, as a society, progressively lose meaning, which I think comparatively would be quite worse based on the characterization. There's something I really want to kick on, maybe potentially preemptively win on this, because maybe CG actually runs the case that we expected. Look, what is in the likely comparative? I think there is a case where Dan mentions about this being religion inherently being coercive. I think the comparative then likely, if we imagine that God isn't here, we believe he's the comparative is, I think, likely science. I think there are a couple responses to this, but then also bring a benefit comparative to people believing in science overall. Look, I think science is still coercive, right? Note that it's a human invented concept to the same extent as religion is, i.e., we assign meaning and values to concepts we call numbers, stars, laws, but it's equally A, controlled by institutions or elites, meaning 99.9% of people don't ever have access to fucking NASA, big pharma, mathematical explanations of our emotions, war, etc. Meaning you still live under a coercive system that you lack recourse to as an average human. But B, even if this isn't true, I actually think that religion is better in terms of coercion than it is science, right? Because to the extent to which certain scientific concepts we do have access to, like definite, like we call math, we call laws or whatever, they still don't explain a lot of our emotions, our everyday struggles. Meaning it might be more certain in terms of objective debate values. It doesn't relieve you of the feeling of being lost, whereas religion provides the freedom of interpreting your existence in a way in which you essentially want, which I think is essentially more freedom of the mind, to the extent to which you're still going to have elites and institutions sort of giving you a sort of a narrative that you have to believe in or think it's true. I think you have less recourse towards something that says is mathematically proven or just objectively true, as opposed to the open interpretations of God which you have are going to grow likely right now. Cool. So what is the comparative? I think crucially in the world we're going to live in, we need to have a way to assign purpose in the sense of meaning to us as living beings. Know that by supporting the concept of the continuous abandonment of religion in the face of not seeing the sense of continuing to believe in it, means that people over time have to internalize that the world is so shit that it doesn't matter anymore, right? Even if I go to hell, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if someone is listening to me, right? I think over time that turns into something that makes you feel like on prop, you're going to have the narratives of like, not going to have the narrative find comfort in like someone actually backing you and listening to you, even in your last moments, even when it gets really hard, or that there is still a chance to get better, right? That the people that we lost, that we are losing right now, to disease, to addiction, to famine, that they had a better place to go to, right? That are not essentially gone, you're going to see them again, right? I think these are the things that you're essentially going to lose, and you're going to feel that you've lost people for nothing, and the world essentially, there's no one that is going to save you at the end of the day. So even if I live as an average human, it's not a fucking privileged debater. If you live somewhere where you genuinely don't see a purpose, you have to work on a field for fucking 12 hours, which is like reality in a lot of the world, at the point where you don't feel that maybe at some point magically someone is going to intervene, it's going to get better, or if you don't think that in the other world the people you lost have a better way of life, I think it's progressively you just have no fucking meaning in the community where I guess people love you when there is no God. But let's do a real comparative of the community here, because I think Dan lives in like the 13th century. To what extent do people actually fight over religion anymore? Know that the religion, to be expansive, it has to have ideals of community loving the people around you, right? So we can save more people, they have to believe in God. Based on the capacity of interpretation, which is still quite open based on the scriptures and no one actually understanding what the fuck happened with Jesus, in a constantly liberalizing world, we expand our definitions of who our brothers are, right? So know that the more identities exist in minorities that Dan wants to talk about, the more you have to expand, the more people are going to take in. Also, so know then the Pope having to take a different stance, because now the more people are liberalizing, finding different identities, we don't want to keep losing people, so we're even going to bite some bullets of changing a certain type of interpretation, but to get more people, because the sense of the community is the one you always need the most for propagating, even if it's your selfish goals of getting more money, but also more importantly to actually provide safe and comfort to people, you genuinely need to open up more. But before I go on how uniquely religion does enable us to liberalize a lot of areas in the world, I will take closing government.
If those hardships still occur as badly as you say, then don't you think it's very likely that people at some point still start believing in religion, making your case fully uncomparative to this debate?
No, no, not necessarily. So I'm supporting. So, oh my God. So it's a continuum, right? So if it says we are losing religion for some point, of giving you likelihood as to why we are to lose religion if you support this concept, right? Meaning if the world still stays the same or just gets worse, I would rather us never have to go through abandoning religion in the first place, but to actually believe in it. I was quite clear in my first minute. Cool. Very important. No, because of these ideas that I just talked about the sense of community and it's sort of having more like bigger than you, it can affect you in a lot of ways. A lot of the world is not liberal, but not because of necessarily religion, but because people do have lack access to education or a lot of concepts and don't sit around and philosophize like we do and just live a normal life. That leads to places in which women do not have rights, gays do not have rights, and all of these things. Note that with the way in which you can interpret religion to be more empowering for these people, right? As you have Islamic feminism that looks at women through purity as the ones who were assigned from God as mothers, as someone who you're going to support more. Meaning, when you already have the powerful narratives of community of seeing certain people as very pure, as valuable in the eyes of God, it's a stronger narrative to get them to buy in and to go against autocratic ideas, against more primitive ideas, and to actually open up and liberalize. I just think the world is not going to get better. If that is the framing in which you operate, please just find some sense of meaning in this world. For these reasons, vote opening up.
I'd like to thank the Leader of Opposition for that speech and invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue.
May I go to the bathroom just really quickly before my speech?
Yeah, Nebor.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Before I start my speech, I'd like to say two things. First, panel, please don't give us last just because it will be using the word epistemic. I know it's a meme, but I love the word epistemic. Secondly, I'd like to say something to my partner, Dani Spaklovic. Ik ga zwemmen in Bacardi Lemon. Een echte tijger is niet te temmen. Ik ga zwemmen in Bacardi Lemon. Je kijkt me aan, wat doe je met me? I'll be starting my speech in, my stopwatch. Sorry. I'll be starting in my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, note that this motion talks about an eventual change, so both teams need to characterize two things. First, when, and secondly, how is this likely to happen? I'm glad that Ola actually does have a mechanism as to how she thinks the change from religion will happen, which is this idea of grand existential hopelessness that God has abandoned us all. First of all, I think this is unlikely the way conversion to atheism happens in the real world. Usually, you stumble on Reddit or on the internet and you see people making arguments against religion, or your education clashes with your religious education as a child, or something clashes with your values. Let's say you really believe in gay rights and equality, but religion says that this shouldn't happen. So that's why you make an informed decision to switch for religion. I think it's unlikely that most people are going to be so despondent with the world that they're going to come to the specific realization, oh, everything is so shit specifically because God abandoned us. We think this is really unlikely. But let's talk about the actual likely scenario in terms of how the world is going to develop. So I think that in the next 100 years, either climate change will fry us all, so there is no debate, or we actually overcome climate change with new technologies. Specifically, globally, the international community, like universities right now, especially after COVID, communicate all with each other to develop new technology. What this looks like is food being grown indoors with UV lights. In the next 30 years, we're likely to solve poverty and hunger worldwide because of the technology that happens. Secondly, massive redistribution of wealth across the world. You see that one of the most powerful countries in the world right now is China, whose number one policy is to feed the poor, even if they're authoritarian. In the West, massive movements for the redistribution of goods, critiquing the capitalist system. That's why it's so popular in debate circles, as Ola mentioned. But next, just by the virtue of capitalism and historical materialism, products that are inaccessible now will become accessible in the future. Look like computers were extremely expensive in the beginning, but now everyone has a supercomputer basically on their phones. This gives individuals more utility to actually interact with the world. And fourthly, finally, in developing countries like Africa that are poor right now, the population has tripled in the last 40 years because of the reduction of child mortality, because of A, investment from the West, like altruism, and B, like new markets are formed in poor countries. So there's incentive for the international community to actually develop poor areas. Note that our model is that these things are likely to lead to the switch of religion because extra development of your life is going to make you abandon God because you no longer need the coping mechanisms Ola talked about. Specifically, Ola for some reason assumes that the counterfactual here is that instead of finding like comfort in religion, you'll find comfort in science. I don't think most people find comfort in science. What's likely to happen in the future is that because of the increase in technology, we'll have more access to, let's say, artistic jobs or jobs that fulfill you, allowing you to leave a legacy. Yes, you might not have like life after death, but you can actually do something that fulfills you because you're working as an artist or a writer and not having to work in a factory because the conditions have improved. Second, better entertainment. There's more niche Netflix shows for whatever niche identity you want and enjoy or whatever niche interest you have. Thirdly, like more peace in the world because of deterrents such as nuclear weapons, and we're likely advancing as a society. Global communities, connection. You can talk about metal with someone on the other side of the world, and like in China, because of technologies like the internet. And finally, like if we accept Ola's premise that people are going to be hopeless as fuck, we don't want in that world for people to opt into religion, because then religious is particularly exploitative. Like if you are hopeless and religious is your only comfort, religious leaders are going to have disproportionate power to manipulate you because that's a counterfactual proposed by Ola. So you're actually going to fear death even more if you don't listen to exactly what your religious leader tells you, because that's the only thread you have to have any hope in the world. But let's talk about like and finally, like social movements are going to lead to more benefits to LGBT people, to women and stuff like that that's happening in developing countries. So you're less likely to have to resort to only finding happiness in heaven because you'll be able to find happiness in real life. Now, let's actually talk about how life will substantially improve for the everyday person. First, on epistemic stonewalling. So we do concede to Ola that there are religious people who are liberal, right? Who are like adapting to the times. But the problem is that even perfectly rational scientific people who are leaning progressive sometimes make concessions because they have to stick to the scriptures. So even if they have an intuition, yes, I like my LGBT friends, I will still hang out with them, but I will still not like accept their marriage or view their marriage as equal because my scripture epistemically stonewalls this belief, because if I believe this, I would contradict directly what comes from God. This looks like, for instance, you being able to be friends with Christians who are really conservative, but you still know that they judge you. This looks like being a progressive Muslim in the West who does respect all institutions, but still only marries other Muslims because this is what your religion tells you. Even if this does not happen like in 100 years, if we say it happens sooner on our side of the world, meaning you have more quality time with other people, you have a broader circle of friends, you have a better sense of community because you're not epistemically stonewalled by the issues of religion. Before I move on, I'll take a point from closing. Closing. No? Okay. Ola, go ahead.
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just very confused why, if the world is so magical and hopeful, like you say, like inequality is still rising, and they said the same thing during the Industrial Revolution, but like people were still sad after.
Okay, so I gave you two reasons what would happen. First, if things are as hopeless as Ola says, then religion just makes it worse. But secondly, I gave you so many reasons as to why the current technological progress also translates into a quality of life, like getting new jobs in terms of how historical materialism allows you more time to actually educate yourself and participate in social movements to improve things for your marginalized group because you don't have to work all day in a factory. Like these things interact, and I prove specifically the link between technological advancement and social advancement. Finally, on justice. Look, we recognize that authoritarian governments exist, but two things. First, there's a massive push right now for reform of the legal system. Look like Black Lives Matter in America. The legal system should give us more justice in the actual world that we live in. Secondly, if you believe in a God, that God will mete out justice in the future, you're less likely to fight for justice right now because you know, oh, that bad guy will just be punished in hell. Like demons will rape and torture him all day. So I don't have to worry about having justice right now. It will happen in the future, removing the call to justice. And fourthly, like with the increase of technology, like social media, like being able to film actual injustices happening or having records of judges more widely available, you can call for accountability in real life more. look, OG has a very simple model. The world is developing in a way such that people will voluntarily leave their religion because you recognize it is only a hindrance for their personal happiness. We absolutely welcome this movement. Vote for opening government.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech and invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to close the top half of this debate. Hear.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. I'm not going to do a thank you to any coaches, just to point out that ESL people are the majority in this round. So fair play to you all, and OG are not the only ESL people in this round. Okay, so don't say vote for the only ESL team when you are not. Okay, couple of things, starting now. First off, what is this world? What does solace look like? Why are people happier on our side of the debate? Second of all, religion and power. Ollie, I think, does a good job of analyzing this already, and I think the responses of are likely comparative as to why we get to this world doesn't get the right responses from opening government. Why so? I think Ollie is correct in saying, look, ultimately for people to have a drastic change in their mind, because Ollie is correct in saying status quo, the majority of the world outside of very niche communities in very developed countries are religious and do believe in God, meaning something must happen in order for this to have a drastic shift in how people view the world. Two things on this. The real only analysis we get from opening government is that, look, the world will be nice enough, i.e. there will be social media proliferation, etc., and people will have rights, etc., and therefore they won't need to turn to God. Like 3 examples of why this is wrong, but then I'll also analyze it. Mark Zuckerberg, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Bill Gates all probably are the 3 pillars of the criteria that opening government talked about in terms of social media, justice, and technology. They are all highly religious, right? Like, I think that at the point Zuckerberg wasn't for a bit and then realized it was really important. That's actually important later in the case. I think that that becomes really important in this because it shows that it isn't necessarily just the world you live in and the surroundings around you that are important in terms of your connection to faith, but your internal connection to God and what that means to you and what that can provide for you as an individual. This is why Ollie is correct on the mass, because if all individuals have made the choice, like all, or at least the majority, but all according to the motion, individuals have made the choice that God isn't real, something inside of them has died, i.e. something inside of them that made them currently believe that God was real, that God was worth ultimately giving up a lot for, because being religious is fucking difficult sometimes, right? Like giving up a lot for your religion. If something makes them change that, something inside humanity has broken, because the connection to the thing that provided you solace, provided you hope, provided you comfort is now gone. Ollie is correct that is likely to be some form of a wasteland. Whether it is an economically prosperous wasteland or not, I don't really care. Why is that massively important? Because Ollie is correct. We don't prefer a world or support a world that develops in which everybody is somewhat miserable. Why so? Because, okay, again, to be comparative to opening government say that the comparative is not scientist, but people become atheists because logic, right? That kind of confuses me a little bit, but also Ollie is very correct in saying that the comparative structures that exist in opening government are still likely to be coercive, are still likely to be controlled by small groups of people, are still likely to make the decisions that affect the world, i.e. I will never understand, no matter how much I try, what X plus Y plus whatever means. But someone will tell me that that's what it means, and I'll have to go along with it, because on opening government side, there's still going to be some form of power, or there's still going to be someone setting my laws, or there's still going to be someone doing whatever. The difference is, I don't have a personal connection with NASA. I don't have a personal relationship with NASA. NASA isn't there for me when I get cancer and my father dies. NASA isn't there for me sitting next to me in the bed when I'm having cancer treatment. The difference on our side is your belief in God, your belief in the afterlife, your belief that one day something might happen for your children that is better than what you can ever give them, that they die and they go to heaven and they get to be happy for the rest of life, gets the majority of the world through. OG say you're happy at the point where you've got some just laws. I don't think that's what happiness looks like. Happiness in our world looks like being able to perceive of something outside of your control and put faith in it that ultimately good will happen, either because God will be there to help you through it, or that after all the bad happens to you, something good will happen. 2 things on OG's responses to this. They say people won't fear death because there's no longer hell. People will also fear never having anything nice in their life, never having some form of connection that makes them feel that living was worthwhile. We stand over a world in which people have a means of going on, even if that is just hope. 2 more things on this, right? I think that ultimately individuals are able to use religion as a form of development, right? That is to say that homophobia and sexism are not a cause of religion. Religion has just often used them to perpetuate power, i.e., homophobia, sexism, racism, etc., are a means of maintaining control that in any circumstance is still possible on their side. Science has historically been very sexist, very racist, very terrible, because it is just about the power that you have in society and how you manipulate that information to get what you want for your groups of people. Scientists are even more capable of doing this on their side than religion is on our side. Why so? Firstly, what I said earlier about the personal relationship, right? You can be a woman in a country that has very terrible sexist laws towards you that they base on religion, but you can know that your connection with God is separate from the connection that the terrible people have to God. The difference is when the scientists are the people on the earth saying a sentence, there is no alternative interpretation of what those individuals are saying that you can call to and that you can fight for. Meaning on our side, we get more of a pushback against power when you can reinterpret things like scriptures, when you can use your faith as a means of holding on against and hoping for a better religion, sorry, a better leadership, etc. Very often, a lot of revolutions come from this idea that you are worthwhile fighting for and there is something better to fight for. God can be that comfort. God can be that solace. I'll take back half. CG.
Great. So given that LO says this would happen regardless in 100 years' time, you don't show why science won't replace eventually, and you don't show why when science replaces after 100 years, all the harms you just described doesn't happen either ways.
No, that's what we did show. We said that if science does replace, a lot of the harms of science happen. So no. So observer, turn yourself off. I think that science, I show that science does replace in many situations because that's what OG kind of outlines, or justice, or someone replaces because power structures occur. Therefore, the problems happen. I think I've been quite comparative to say why God is helpful, and hopefully about that. Okay, two final things. On autocracy and human rights, a little bit more on this. Genuinely, religion has been the means for solving a lot of wars that OG contend. The reason for it is OG admit that wars are likely to happen on both sides, and they say, look, the reason it's better on their side is that there's just less. The difference is it's harder to end those wars because there's no appeal to the fact that you were doing something wrong, right? The biggest thing we can do at the moment to the worst leaders in the world is to say you are going against God, you are going against what your God says, and you are able to change that, right? OG are also correct insofar as we are liberalizing, right? That is to say that all of Olia's analysis as to why we get better worlds in which we can point to I don't know, like women being mothers, etc., is on our side of this debate. The last rebuttal we get from opening government on this is, if it gets as bad as we say, religion will just rebuild up again. Two things on this. A, it is likely to be more worse at the beginning insofar as we would have to redo all the progress we have done. And B, you have stood over the death of God, meaning people don't have this faith. Rebuilding that up is a lot harder. We beg you to oppose.
Cool. I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech. A reminder for all observers to please ensure that you are muted when coming into the room, otherwise you will get booted out quite fairly. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the Member of Government to open the back half of this debate. Here.
Hi, please, can you hear me? I'll start my speech in a minute. First off, I just want to say thank you to Andrews and thank you to everyone who has supported us till now. We are very, very proud of this moment, and we know the significant impact that this is likely to have on our community, and that's why we are happy. All right. Sorry, I scattered my papers a bit. So. Okay, cool. I would start my speech in 3, 2, one. I'm going to start with the framing, right? First of all, this debate is not simply not about religion, right? We think yes, it can be about organized religion, but we think there are thousands of religion that do not depend on the level of organization, and therefore every other argument that comes as a result of organized religion, example, the religious leaders' influence, conflict that comes from proselytization, does not have the maximum impact that you need in order to vote them as the winners. We think we engage on an individual level, mostly because the motion says that is the belief that every single person on earth does not believe in the existence of that power. That's where the impact of the extension comes in. Two, we think the process doesn't matter. It is a wash, especially from opening opposition, because there are equal chances of it happening. On one side, we have technology improving, resource mobilization, getting better, justice systems happening. So it could be that, well, we have a perfect society where we do not believe in God, or it could be the opposite, the rising levels of inequality that is happening, especially within Africa and some parts of the world, and like populism and all those bad kind of stuff. Given that these two have an equal chance of happening, it is a wash. And two, it also means that the end necessarily will justify the means. That means even in the worst case scenario, if this is happening as a result of a bad process, we are saying the end is a very good thing, which you need to be able to prioritize. Thirdly, the comparative is not just science. We posit differently. Like, even though the comparative could be anything else, it's not science. We think it is humanity. Why is it so? Humanity is the direct opposition or the opposite of transcendence, right? Science is vertical in its nature, in the sense that you contribute, you interrogate, you utilize. So the opposite of a transcendence is one that is at the bottom, which is most likely humanity that looks up to this transcendence. And secondly, their case is contingent on science being bad, which is actually very difficult to prove, because that's not how it happens in most cases. We do agree that science can be racist, it can be bigotry, etc., but that's not the most cases. Worst case scenario, we think most likely is good because it depends on our funding, it engages us on a rational level, requires logical form, whereas on the comparative, religion requires us to wholly believe in it without questioning and relies on methods like indoctrination. We think that is far worse. Three things we are going to talk about in this debate, like under one main heading. Our extension is this: we maximize the human experience. As simple as it is, we'll prove it in three ways. First of all, how we maximize autonomy. Two, how we maximize accountability systems. And three, why we have better morality. First off, on autonomy. Why is autonomy very, very important? Realize that autonomy is the very metric by which you are able to take every other action. That means that your ability to be able to find individual actualization requires on you being able to have higher levels of autonomy, because it exposes you to much more choices which you're able to make. Even if you need to make it within a political system, you having a vote, for example, versus you not having no votes, is most likely to increase your autonomy, in the sense that you're able to vote to influence things in a certain maximum way. It means that this debate is necessarily contingent on one who can't be able to prove that there's more autonomy in our world. We think on the comparative, you can't be able to say that you are influenced by a lot of things. These things could look like culture, identity, state, ECT. But we posit the comparative is that on your side, this autonomy is one that is indoctrinated on you, one that constrains you, one that is outside of your human influence and input, right? On the we think on the comparative, right, you are able to have systems, culture, with identity, which you most likely can't be able to contribute to in order to be able to expand. That means that on our side, you have more autonomy in our world. Even if you don't believe in this, it still most likely works on you, because they're likely to say, not everyone believes in religion. So how does this essentially work? One, because the fear or the doubt that comes that, what if these guys are right? It limits the extent of your action. It means that you are not likely to take extreme actions in most of those instances. Two, you still have to interact with them. It doesn't depend on you being like very bad to them, right? You judge them, you criticize them, you chastise them. You are forced to go to church with them because they are your family. You are supposed to respect their identity. You are not supposed to say certain things. It limits your expression and the fullness of that expression. Three, and we think this is very impactful, it influences the systems which affect you. So for example, Christians have hijacked the political system to create a pushback against sex work. So it means that if you have the capacity to be able to work in that and gain more money, your choices are necessarily influenced because of the politicization which necessarily comes. This means that you cannot gain more from life, whether you believe in it or you do not believe in it. You're unable to gain more from life economically, terms of social systems, and etc. Last mechanism, we think there's a level of cognitive dissonance that exists. Given that the instructions that come from the Bible are outside of your spectrum, outside of your world, we think that these are things which necessarily vitiate your autonomy and your conscience. It means that even if you are educated and you most likely don't want to believe in a religion, you want to change your mind, you are still reminded of things that happen in your childhood. You are still reminded of certain miracles, certain sites which may prove these things to be true. That level of cognitive dissonance means that most likely you can't opt out of this, and this limits your interactions. It informs who you socialize with, all your friends, and the kind of economic opportunities that you have. On the comparative, you can still get community in our world, and my system of accountability will show you that. One, accountability. Why do we hold our leaders more accountable? Because once we stop believing in the transcendence, we are much more likely to believe in ourselves. We no longer have opt-out options for this world, right? It means that we are far more likely to hold our leaders accountable because we know that we have one world, one life, and we are supposed to enjoy it. This influences autonomy because we are able to control it in a way. But secondly, it means that we can't defer hope. But why is this better? Because these laws are far more accessible on a comparative. It means even if you prove that democracy is a shit now, people vote and it doesn't happen, we think that in that way they get to feel like they are part of the decision, and that is better in terms of the catharsis that they are able to get in terms of them being able to hold that decision. The impact is that we improve our political system and participation. There are far larger impacts because these are able to improve our preferences overall. So this is far more impactful than OG, who says that, but you just have like better justice on our side or in social media technology. It is no, this influences every other aspect of religion that you have. Why are we likely to get better morals in our world? Because morality on their side is limited per someone believing in you. That's why America does not say that we believe in God and religion, so we will not bomb the shit out of Iraq. We think on the comparative, what you have in our world is mutual interest, and that is far more important in building morality that is accessible to all, because you know that this is likely to impact me. On their side, people can say, I am religious, therefore God has saved me, and therefore I can opt out of your laws, and therefore it cannot influence me. We think that is far more bad. Consider this on the comparative of the individual, and this likely must affect everyone, and that's how come we get all the better things in our world, because we have increased autonomy, even if they prove that there are other influences. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the member of government for that speech and remind speakers that per the WDC manual, the taking of POIs is an important part of engagement. You're encouraged to continue offering them and to take at least one. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the member of opposition to continue.
Just give me a second. Can POIs in the chat, please? And also, I assume I am audible. Wait, Jason, am I audible?
Oh, sorry, I gave the thumbs up. I didn't realize you were.
Yeah, no, I didn't see it. Cool. Right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Multiple extensions from closing opposition. Firstly, framing. 1. Government's framing of global means that people who do not get the good out of religion for the most part are able to self-select out of it. Note their own analysis means individuals have the capacity to do so. Secondly, you're able to feel comfortable in your belief if you are religious because you can see the outside and have a frame of reference in order to justify who you are, and that feels a degree of catharsis for those individuals. Therefore, in op, we get the good parts of religion while solving the government outline. But thirdly, I would just posit Pascal's wager. That is that individuals do not actually, one, you do not have epistemic access as to understanding what God is or what God may exist. Secondly, the capacity that a world in which no human believes in God means that no individual is able to identify or call out that God may exist, and therefore it's impossible to know whether you or go to an afterlife where individuals may die or exist within that internal suffering. Why, therefore, within that context, why can religions can be progressive? Note, OO state an incentive, but not capacity. There are 3 reasons. 1, differing interpretations between different individuals mean that there's a capacity to understand that there's different understandings of context. Secondly, historiographical issues, that is, missing pieces of that religion allow individuals, progressives, to fill in those gaps, and therefore understand it better. Thirdly, translations across languages allow us to undermine the conservative bits, e.g. the Bible wasn't actually about bad people, gay, as it was about like other things within that context. But also just note that progressive people are often richer and donate to progressive institutions. The liberals go and fund the church that makes individuals and feel like less homophobic, so they can justify it to their friends that to some extent they're still religious. Why is there an incentive for people to do this? 1, that's proximate to their identity, so the direct incentive to go and actively do it and therefore feel comfortable in it. Secondly, they want to be own unique way, so therefore have a direct incentive to do it. So for example, if you are like gay in a liberal country, you feel fulfillment where the state may continue to prosecute you on the gov side still. Or secondly, religions are relatively strong at understanding the issues of people and adapting to them, and therefore they're often relatively good. Why is there an incentive for these religions to be good generally? One, they want trust from the things and want to prevent government crackdowns, e.g., the removal of like having tax breaks of your religious institutions, or the ability to fund certain things so that those religions can continue to exist. Second degree of mechanization. People will be willing to listen to them in the first place. If a religion is always continuously bad, it is very difficult for you to be able to preach your message to them. So therefore, they have a direct incentive to be relatively good. Thirdly, believers donate to those religions. That is that you want to continue to at least justify your existence and therefore get donations from your members. So at least to some extent, you have an incentive to be good. The impact here is you healthcare, education, and community projects that often are spread into non-religious communities, which affects some people will always continue to want to be religious. One, parents teaching children that they copy because they defer to the expertise of their children, of their parents, because more life experience and exist within them. Two, state teaching from countries, meaning individuals are often conditioned to believe a certain religion or at least buy into it. Thirdly, you're reaffirmed by your peers, e.g., you do a moral action that is continuing with that religious, belief. On our side, people often will practice their religions because they feel comfortable in their identity and they continue to exist. Secondly, they believe to some extent they are maybe able to access greater people to join that religion. Thirdly, it does not encroach heavily on the rest of society, so they've no strong incentive to stop religion in this context and allow it to continue to exist because it often provides wider benefits, as I previously are likely to exist on our side without encroachment. What is required to remove religion entirely? It's not just that everyone stops believing in it. It requires conflict. There are three reasons for this. One, you need to threaten people with violence so that the outcome of being religious is necessarily not as high as that religion not existing in the first place. Secondly, it looks like prison, i.e. removing people from practicing their religion so there's degrees of separation so that they no longer have all of the previous mechanisms. I say, thirdly, deterrence, cracking down, discriminating against individuals in that wider society and therefore making their life worse. Secondly, why is this necessary? These states will believe that the cost of engaging and doing these acts of violence will make the cost of engaging in that religion too high that individuals are not willing to engage with it, and therefore it's not the utopia that opening government want to enact, but rather a dystopia. Before I go on, POI OG, can you give the
Sorry,
POI?
Yeah, you're right. You can be a gay guy with a progressive Christian friend, but what they will probably tell you is, "Oh, I love you, but I hate the sin." On our side, there is no sin.
Okay, I just don't think that deals with our case. What is required? Therefore, why is this conflict likely? Examples of Poland, Iraq, etc. They need to defend people being discriminated against. So as the state power is premised on this, they often are likely to double down and be retaliatory towards those individuals who are discriminating against religion. Secondly, the afterlife. Two reasons here. One, you fear that if you not to defend your religion in the afterlife, you will have infinite suffering, e.g. hell, or the possibility of rebirthing as a lower individual. Secondly, the higher power will make you suffer for not defending the religion or the belief in that higher power, and therefore you have a direct incentive to do this. The third thing is hopelessness. This identity is something that bigger than you and something you ought to defend for your life. So individuals are often willing to die if for their religion, if those things are necessarily so important. There's additional reasons why they have the capacity to do so. One, internal conflict within countries where religious populations mean that they are likely to continue to be long. Secondly, massive amount of donations of resources. Donations by people who are members historically and continuously often want to help in order to preserve that identity. The impacts of this are threefold. One, there's an anxiety of conflict happening at any given time. Something may accrue. A bomb may be dropped in tyrant. Your family member may be locked up for being religious or not being religious, and therefore those individuals continuously have anxiety whether religious or not. Secondly, actual harms. It's the fact of that economies literally will get destroyed in the process of removing religion from these countries, and therefore you're likely to see individuals' quality of life massively reduced, and this often requires a significant amount of time to recover, so therefore people's lives are worse off. Third, look, Gov win the war because that is the eventual part of the motion. But there's 3 or 4 weighing mechanisms to posit here. One, this will affect on the planet and cause massive drops in quality of life. 2, it's more certain because the process is prior to the removal of religion that all other 3 teams are contingent on occurring. 3, they're often contingent on us. So the world that opening government and closing government wish to outline is contingent on our analysis that shows that communities are destroyed, that lack of trust between individuals will continue to exist because a bloody war is likely to go on. This is likely to mean that the impacts are significantly bigger, and even if you think the probability is lower, the possibility is better on the outcome. For all of those reasons, closing opposition.
I'd like to thank the member of opposition for that speech and invite the government whip to continue.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, just give me a few seconds to set up my timer and I should be good. Okay, great. Awesome. I'm going to take POIs in the voice, but most likely I'll take OO in my 5th minute, around 5:30. Yeah. Just give me a second, put something in my sheets. Awesome. The fan was blowing my sheets, so I needed to put it off. Great. I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. What I'm going to do is 2 things: whip the most important extension within this debate, show you why it wins, give you the metric on which those extension wins, and then deal with CO, given that Erasmus dealt with a lot of those things, and their harms on science was like not largely proven. My POI also dealt with most of it, right? So our extension is that religion takes away a huge portion of autonomy of all persons who believe in it. This is because of 3 reasons. Erasmus says, A, because in most instances you are born into it and you have no choice to opt in or out of it. B, because there is a strict version of religion that your parents buy into, which you are indoctrinated with, which means even within the scope of that religion, you are denied the ability to choose which version of that religion that best reflects your interests, etc. Thirdly, uniquely, religion weaponizes the concept of the afterlife, which CEO talks about, to exploit the fear of individuals, to force them to do things that are dictated by religion. Fear is a very powerful emotion. This is very manipulative and erodes your agency because it weaponizes biological hormones that you cannot fight nor resist to coerce you into doing things by saying that if you don't do them, you are going to burn for eternity in hell. What this means is that this is a unique way in which religion deeply erodes agency in huge ways that science, culture, and all other forms of identity don't. And so, given this and this unique tool of religion, why is this important? This means that religion is upstream of all social institutions that erode agency, and that's so deeply that a huge portion of your agency is taken away. But even if they're able to prove that culture, all other institutions also take away that extent of agency, we are willing to say if we are given the chance to obliterate all those things on our side of the house, we're able to, we want to do it. We don't have a burden to defend the existence of other things that equally erode your autonomy. But B, this means even if all other forms of social institutions exist, regardless of their streams of coercion, they usually form around 60% of the extent to which you are coerced. And religion, given how powerful the concept of the afterlife is and how it manipulates your emotions, is able to form the 40% of erosion of agency that is left. This means that on our world, without God and religion, we are able to unlock a huge portion of human autonomy, which on a large scale inherently validates the very justification on which human beings exist. Why is the more autonomy that exists on our side the most important impact within this debate? Because A, the very premise on which we are regarded as higher cognitive beings is autonomy, which means the more autonomy we have, the more human we are. The inherent quality of feeling human is then principally improved on our side without the existence of religion. Secondly, the practical benefits on preferences, to be specific. A, on social accountability. Because society holds you to account for your choices and does this on the premise that you are completely responsible for these choices, in a world where there is less and less autonomy, it means that decisions that you inherently don't control, yet you are held to account for that, and that is unjust, right? That means that on our side, we give people more room to be able to take more control of their decisions, and that means that the accountability that usually they face is justified. But this is very crucial for 2 reasons. Because usually, sometimes the repercussions of these choices are physical harm. For example, religion coerces you to fast for days and you get stomach ulcer, which affects all other aspects of your life without justifying anything, aside the fact that if you don't fast and pay attention to God, you are going to face his wrath in the afterlife, and that messes up with you in the long run. Secondly, on governance, right? The premise on which the most legitimate forms of governance, i.e. democracy, is premised is on the aggregation of preferences. In a world with autonomy, in a world with more autonomy that exists on our side, there's less misrepresentation of those true preferences. Why? Because the most likely response from up would be that preferences are arbitrary. In a world where you have more room to be able to make those preferences, you're able to choose from competing preferences. What religion does is two things. It actively tells you this to disregard other forms of preferences, specific forms of preferences that may have made you happy regardless, and actively tells you to also prioritize specific forms of preferences regardless of whether it inherently makes you happy or not. What this means is that the less autonomy that exists significantly impacts your access to quality living and happiness, which is a large-scale impact across everybody that participates in religion. Why is this a winning contribution? Because the impact of this extension happened on everyone who would have believed in God on their side, right? The scope of this impact is very huge, bigger than OG. Secondly, the intensity and depth of this impact on autonomy seeps deep into impacting all other aspects of your life. That means that you are able to choose things that make you truly happy on a larger scale, better than the placebo effects that OO gives you. But thirdly, this free up of more autonomy is more important than any other thing they prove because autonomy is upstream of any benefits. Example, slavery was able to contribute significantly to economic development in the West. But given that it eroded autonomy as a process, as a means of getting there, it was illegitimate. No matter the benefits that these guys argue, so far as they are not able to prove that people are inherently autonomous and there's more degree of autonomy on their side, then it is illegitimate for it to exist. I'll take OO.
It is easier to interpret and be happy within a power structure that is based on your power to opt in and opt out, i.e. your faith. You haven't proven that you are not as corrosive, that family opinion doesn't also happen on your side, and that scientists are less easy to question.
So first of all, I said I'm not under any obligation to defend other oppressive institutions. We are fine with a world where if we are given the choice, would obliterate all of them for everybody to be absolutely free, just that world is unrealistic, right? But why do we beat CO? Because CO says religion is progressive. 3 responses. And this seeps into OO's thing about response on interpretation. Interpretation in itself is not very accessible. So people, like OG said, based on interpretation from religious clerics, etc. But secondly, the progressive nature of religion is very slow since it takes decades for one generation to pass for a new generation, a new set of people who believe in that progressive version of religion to enact the change on a wide scale. But secondly, it happens in very few instances due to absolution of religious text. This can happen only in instances where religious text is very, very ambiguous, which is very few in terms of instances. But thirdly, note that this proof actually counters OO's analysis that religion is likely going to live in the near future, right? But secondly, they say, this will lead to war in CO, the process. This is a hypothetical debate. We don't need to debate the process and say it's war. But secondly, they say that, some people who buy into oppression will be oppressed, religion will be oppressed. The Infoslide literally says there will be no living being that exists under the influence of God, which means there's no such minorities on their side. A huge portion of autonomy is taken away on their side. They should defend that proud to propose.
Cool. I'd like to thank the government whip for that speech and finally invite the opposition whip to close the final of this competition. Hear, hear.
Hey, am I audible?
Yep.
Great. For POIs, put them in the chat. Don't verbally interrupt. Kind of throws me off. When I'm ready to take a POI, I'll just call out for one, probably from OG. Let me just get a quick sip of water. 1 sec. Great. Before starting, I'd like to thank 3 people, me, myself, and I, because I'm fucking awesome and I worked really hard to get here and I had to carry Wee Man Jack on my back because he's such a shit debater. That's all I have to say. No niceties. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The flaw in each team in this round is that they presumed when the gods fall that they fall lightly. There's one sure thing about the fall of gods. They do not fall a little. They crash and shatter and sink deeply into green muck and affect everyone around them. we have the thesis of our extension. There are three things that are going to win the round, and I'm going to explain why before getting into a team-by-team comparison. Firstly, on Pascal's wager, why do you weigh this argument, even if it was spent like a minute in Jack's kitchen, is sufficient to win everybody in the round? Even if the potential is unlikely for the existence of God, the government bench has ever proved that God does not exist. That is to say, even if it is unlikely, there is a potential, but the potential for it existing matters based on the degree of the impacts due. We say, even though it is unlikely that God may exist, the potential for him to exist matters insofar as the consequences of not believing in it or having the potential to believe in it with his death are vital. In what way? One, the irreversible impact that if he's real and you die and you go to hell, there's no getting back out of it. Secondarily, that the relative to the other harms everyone else gives of like stripping of autonomy or like coercing people to hate minorities, relative to that harm, the potential harm is infinite in magnitude. That is to say, you burn in hellfire for eternity. Thirdly, you cannot even conceptualize that harm, but we can conceptualize the difficulties of living with religion or the harms that it imposes. All of this is to say that even if it is an unlikely impact, you weigh it over because of the degree of the magnitude of the harms that it carries. Second piece of extension, why religions have the capacity and likelihood to be inclusive when they are not pushed to a survival battle. And this is incredibly important why it wins the round by itself. One, everyone else presumes they have epistemic access to people's preferences. That is to say, people prefer life without religion or prefer like the autonomy that it provides or the comfort. Maybe they don't like to know that they have full freedom, like CG says. They might think it's very scary to live alone in the world, even if they are freer in that world, and want the comfort of knowing a loving God is taking care of them. Not everyone likes full autonomy, but also if OG is right and we can get to a beautiful world, then we give them autonomy in other ways because they're no longer poor. What we do is we provide a choice via flexibility. Religion can become inclusive, flexible, and accommodate different lifestyles and preferences. So for those who want to really fly free and feel like they can control the world on their own, they have that capacity. The comparative is that when you eliminate the death of God, there is no comparative or thing that can replace the supernatural being that God and what he provides. That is to say, all might tell you of all the comforting stuff that religions might provide. What they never tell you is that you give people both options. When religion can be accommodating, inclusive, and flexible, you allow people, no matter what their preferences are, to pick between either of them. I'll get into more clearly differentiating on this specific argument when I get to them, but that's the weighing preemptively here. Thirdly, that religions are likely to not go down easy. That is to say, Jack's analysis on conflict and stuff. The reason why this weighs and beats everyone else in the round is one, that it is certainty in the period beforehand versus I don't actually know what the world is going to look like afterwards, i.e. our timeline of events is closer to the present day where you can conceptualize the likelihood of those events occurring. But secondarily, we take off at their gov at their own metric, that religions become even more coercive before they inevitably get better, magnifying CG's autonomy argument. Because if religions are so big and bad and they try to survive in whatever way they can, then they likely strip the autonomy even more and restrict people's capacity to actually live the lives that they otherwise want to and fulfill their preferences. What this does is, even if you get to a better impact in the future, I don't know why future people's rights matter more than current rights of those who restrict their autonomy. It probably doesn't, insofar as we don't know if they're going to exist or not, and we have a capacity and be more proximate to those who are current to us. Let's get into each team and why we beat them. Firstly, on CG, the case about maximizing the human experience, right? Autonomy. The comparative is off is a life completely outside your influence. I do not know why people have a deferred preference to wanting autonomy over the security and comfort of knowing that the non-autonomous life is taken care of by a God they believe is good for them. So there's a presumption that people care about autonomy. But secondarily, the presumption relies that people cannot opt out. But symmetrically, you cannot opt out of a world that gives you the comfort of religion. And then they say, but you might get still comfort from other communities, right? They can still get that comfort. You just don't need a supernatural God imposing upon you. But they never match the degree of comfort that religions provide. Because even if it's true that it's so large, because if it's true it's so large in your life to be coercive, nothing else can be nearly as comforting because they aren't as large in your life. So they can't have this rebuttal and then also build that argument. They have to lose out on comfort or autonomy. And this is where our extension wins the round, because you don't have to pick between Olo's analysis or everybody else's. The capacity or incentive for religion to be flexible allows people to pick between one or the other two. We get to have our cake and eat it too. On OG then, their arguments on coping mechanisms relies on an assumption that it's developed in such a way that we don't need those those coping mechanisms anymore, i.e. that they get the benefits because things religion provided can no longer be provided by religion. So it gets provided in some other way. But just because religion doesn't exist to provide it doesn't mean something else props up in its absence to provide it. They give assertions, not reasons for why that's likely. They say, technology means we get mass production of food, but I don't know why this technology means that the most marginalized get it, or we get redistribution because you have capitalists critique and trying to care about uplifting the poor. But I don't know how far that degree is. That is to say, the reasons they give for why it's going to be a good world are numerous, but not fleshed out. That is to say, they give a lot of assertions and package them as reasons. Then they say that it's going to be a slow and easy transition to the death of God. So we're not going to get the conflict that our case is based on. One, their own characterization on religion being coercive and powerful over people's lives proves that it's likely this ends up being a very conflictual process when they see it as a survival mechanism, because the death of God means the death of their own power. So their own analysis uplifts our case, and the logic behind it expands our case as well. Before getting into OG, quick.
Yeah, no assertions. We gave you 7 structural reasons what this world is going to look like, which is prior to any of your case what you outlined. That doesn't mean that you're going to have a vicious war. That also doesn't entail any flexible religion. Please engage with the case.
Yeah, the structural reasons you provided were taglines that I don't know why actually materialized. I don't know why technology means everybody's now magically not poor instead of unhappy. Like, see my prior analysis for why all of these are like lists of reasons, but not necessarily like justified reasons. But also, yeah, I already rebutted by saying the logic of you saying religions are overarching and very powerful is the same reason why they're likely going to be very conflictual. On O, then why do we beat them? Because one, the rebuttal to Gov is that religions don't want to be expansive and include people, so they don't fight as much. Now, our case is not contingent on that, because even if religions might have the incentive to be accommodating and expansive, that doesn't mean they have the capacity to, because the text might be so regressive that they just can't be progressive even if they want to. Jack fills in this gap by saying epistemic stonewalling cannot happen because within the structure of religious texts that people buy into have the capacity to actually be flexible. So we're not contingent upon them on that. And finally, we don't presume that comfort that people have is the most important thing in the round. We say people might want comfort, they might want full autonomy. The way you win is giving them the choice to, and you get that via flexibility. Never been proud to win Doc's world.
I'd like to thank the opposition whip for that speech, and once again congratulate all speakers for what was a very entertaining final. For the last time, shake virtual hands, make virtual friends, usual. Does the panel have a breakout, or do we just wait for everyone to leave?